Title: You, miserable human, dared to save me, she shouted, concealing her royal blood, a sci-fi HFY story. The faint hum of the spaceship's engines was the only sound cutting through the emptiness of the vast universe. It was a strange sort of tranquility, the kind that only existed in the quiet vacuum between stars, where nothing could be heard, nothing could be felt, at least. That's what Ethan thought as he gripped the console with sweaty palms, his heart pounding in his chest. The ship was on a direct course toward an asteroid field, an area so dense with space debris that no one, human or otherwise, was ever supposed to navigate it. Yet here he was, trying to keep the ship intact long enough to reach an unknown destination. He couldn't fathom how he'd ended up in this mess, much less the wild turns that had led him to this point. A few hours ago, he'd been a low-ranking officer in the Terran Space Force, dealing with the usual petty diplomacy between colonies. Now, he was being chased across the stars by a group of deadly alien mercenaries, and at the center of it all was her, the princess. Her name was Alara, though she had insisted on being addressed as Commander throughout the ordeal. She was beautiful alien beauty, sharp features that blended her species' regal elegance with an air of dangerous unpredictability. Her eyes glowed like twin stars, and every movement of her seemed both deliberate and chaotic, like a predator waiting to pounce. Of course, Ethan didn't know any of this when he found her. It was supposed to be a routine mission, an intelligence gather on a small moon that had been taken over by space pirates. But when Ethan arrived, his shuttle had been shot down in an ambush, and Alara had appeared seemingly out of nowhere, her spaceship swooping down to rescue him. "You," she spat as she unceremoniously yanked him out of his crash site. "Miserable human, what do you think you're doing here? You should have stayed in your safe little corner of the galaxy and not dared venture to the frontier." He had tried to explain himself, of course, but she was a force of nature, all fiery eyes and sharp words. She hadn't even given him a chance to breathe before she'd commandeered his ship and steered it toward the most dangerous asteroid field in this sector, hoping to shake the mercenaries off their tail. Ethan didn't care how she had ended up there, all he cared about was surviving. But her insistence on not revealing anything about herself had unsettled him. She was more than just a warrior, he could feel it. There was a hidden depth behind her cold exterior, something powerful, something royal, but whenever he tried to ask, she'd simply scoff and dismiss him with a sharp, "Mind your own business, human." That was until they were cornered, drifting dangerously close to the asteroid field. "Don't you understand?" she said, her voice tight with frustration as she gripped the console with both hands. "I don't need your help. I can escape this on my own. I don't need you to save me." Ethan narrowed his eyes, his thoughts racing as he prepared to fire the maneuvering thrusters. "You're not exactly in a position to turn down help right now," he snapped back. Her eyes flashed, a hint of something ancient and regal behind the intensity. "You don't even know who I am, do you?" she said, her tone dropping to an icy calm that made Ethan shiver. "I could crush you with a single thought. Human, you have no idea what you're dealing with." His grip tightened on the controls. "Then why don't you? You're not doing such a great job of escaping on your own." For a long, tense moment, they both just stared at each other, a silent battle of wills playing out in the confined space of the cockpit. Finally, Alara leaned back, her eyes narrowing. "Fine, you want the truth?" She stood suddenly, her movement as swift and graceful as a hunting cat. "I am no mere warrior." She paused, as if contemplating the weight of her next words. "I am the last of the royal bloodline of the Vrentari." Ethan blinked, unsure whether to laugh or be terrified. "The royal bloodline of the wait, the Vrentari? The ones who?" "Yes," she interrupted sharply, glaring at him. "The very same ones. The ones who conquered entire star systems and whose blood runs through the veins of the galaxy's most powerful rulers. And now," she added bitterly, "look at me, a fugitive, hiding in the shadows of your pathetic human empire." He couldn't help himself. The pieces started to click together. He had heard stories of the Vrentari, a once mighty empire that had fallen to political intrigue and betrayal. Alara was one of them, the last surviving member. A royal bloodline that had been erased, its name spat upon by those who had sought to take her throne. And yet, here she was, hiding in plain sight as if she were nothing more than a lowly fighter. Ethan swallowed hard, suddenly feeling like he was in the presence of something far greater than he'd ever imagined. She wasn't just a warrior, she was royalty. And he had dared to save her. You, she continued, her voice growing more menacing, you miserable human, dared to save me, a princess of the Vrentari. Do you have any idea what you've just done? His heart beat faster. I was just trying to survive, same as you. She glared at him, as if considering his words. Then, her expression softened, just slightly. Perhaps you are more than just a miserable human. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Ethan didn't know what was going to happen next, whether he would be crushed under the weight of her power or whether she would finally let her guard down. But one thing was certain, he would never forget the moment he dared to save her. And for some strange reason, as the ship hurtled through the asteroid field and the mercenaries fell back, he realized that the universe had just become a lot more complicated than he had ever imagined. It was a new beginning, for both of them. Chapter 2, A Rebel's Choice. Ethan's heart hammered as the ship plunged deeper into the asteroid field. Every instinct screamed at him to find a way out, to escape this nightmare. But the universe seemed determined to remind him just how out of his depth he was. The mercenaries weren't far behind, and they were closing in fast, their sleek black ships cutting through the debris like sharks circling their prey. The Vrentari princess, no. Commander, Alara stood with a frozen expression, her sharp eyes scanning the readouts on the ship's control panel. She wasn't panicked, far from it. If anything, she exuded a quiet confidence, as if she had seen this before. Your plan? Ethan asked, his voice tight with anxiety. Her gaze flickered toward him, eyes burning with a strange mixture of disdain and curiosity. My plan, she said slowly, as though savoring the words, is to survive. We'll make it through this. Just follow my lead. The clarity in her voice sent a ripple of doubt through him. Alara was no ordinary fugitive. She was calm, unshaken, as if she knew something he didn't. Follow your lead? We're flying straight into an asteroid field with armed mercenaries on our tail. You really think we can just waltz out of this? He nearly shouted, his hands gripping the console tighter as the ship lurched and veered toward a dense cluster of floating rocks. Alara glanced at him, her lips curling into a faint smirk. You underestimate me, human, and you underestimate the Vrentari. She turned to face the controls, her fingers moving with a grace and precision that matched her regal nature. Ethan had to admit, there was something mesmerizing about her focus. Her every movement spoke of years of training, of a kind of mastery over the universe itself. It was as though the ship was an extension of her, as if it obeyed her without question. He didn't understand. What kind of person was she to have such confidence? To speak with the weight of someone who had faced armies and conquered worlds? But before he could voice another protest, she spoke again, her voice soft, almost apologetic. I didn't want you to know this, but you need to understand. This is more than just survival. These mercenaries, they're not just hunting me, they're hunting my bloodline. Ethan, the Vrentari might be dead, but my blood still holds the key to something far greater than you can imagine. Ethan frowned. What do you mean? What do you have that's so important? Her eyes darkened, and for a moment, he thought he saw a flicker of pain cross her face before it was replaced by the unyielding resolve that had kept her alive this long. The Vrentari once controlled the galaxy. Our technology, our knowledge, it's far beyond anything your species has ever encountered. The last of my people may have fallen, but there are others out there who would do anything to resurrect that empire, and they would kill anyone, human or otherwise, who stands in their way, including you. Ethan was silent for a long moment, digesting her words. He had always known there were secrets in the universe far beyond his comprehension, but hearing it from her, someone so undeniably powerful and yet so haunted, shifted his perception entirely. He wasn't just a pawn in a random game of survival, he was part of something much bigger. What does this have to do with me? He finally asked, his voice cautious. Alara met his gaze, her expression unreadable. You saved me, and now, whether you like it or not, you're involved. The mercenaries have already started spreading the word of my survival, and the rest of the galaxy will soon know that I live. Once they do, they will stop at nothing to capture me, or worse. Ethan's pulse quickened. The implication was clear. She's more than just a princess. She's a key to something vast, and I'm the one who's responsible for her survival. I didn't ask for this, he muttered, looking down at his hands. as if they were stained by the very fate he hadn't chosen. "None of us ask for fate," she said softly, her voice uncharacteristically gentle for a brief moment, "but sometimes, it chooses us." Before Ethan could respond, the ship jolted violently, throwing both of them against the restraints. The proximity alert blared, and Ethan's head snapped back toward the viewport. The mercenaries had entered the asteroid field. "Hold on," Ilara's voice snapped, hardening again as she twisted the controls. "This is where you need to trust me." Ethan gritted his teeth. "Trust you? You're asking a lot, considering everything." "Then," she said, her voice now a quiet growl, "you can either help me or die trying. The choice is yours, human." She didn't wait for an answer. With a swift motion, she activated a series of complex maneuvers that made the ship veer and roll through the asteroid field at impossible speeds. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as the ship weaved between massive rocks, narrowly dodging collision after collision. He'd never seen anything like it, not even in the most daring simulations in the Terran fleet. But as the mercenaries tried to follow, they weren't nearly as agile. They misjudged their speed, colliding with the debris, and a series of explosions rippled through the field as they were taken out one by one. The remaining ships retreated. It was over. For now. The ship slowly came to a stop in the empty, quiet space beyond the asteroid field, and Ilara finally let out a slow breath, her tense shoulders relaxing. Ethan was speechless, staring at the void outside the ship's windows. For a brief moment, he almost couldn't believe it. They'd actually made it. That, he said, finally finding his voice, was insane. Ilara turned to him, her gaze unreadable. "And you're still here. You've seen what I can do, human. That's your first lesson. The universe is far more dangerous than you realize, and it's coming for you now." He shook his head. "I don't know what's worse, the mercenaries or the galaxy you just dragged me into." "Does it matter?" Ilara said, her eyes gleaming with something darker. "You've already chosen. Now, the real game begins." Ethan looked at her, feeling the weight of the universe on his shoulders for the first time. There was no turning back now. The galaxy wasn't just a place he inhabited, it was a battleground, and he had just been thrust onto the front lines. And somewhere, deep inside, he realized something else. He might just be starting to trust her after all. Chapter 3: Shadows of the Past. The ship drifted in the dark expanse of space, a momentary lull after the chaos of the asteroid field. Ethan's body was still buzzing from the adrenaline, his hands shaky on the control panel. The universe outside the window seemed impossibly vast, an endless sea of stars, and yet, everything felt too close now. His reality had shifted, and the weight of Ilara's words lingered in the air. She had been silent for the last few minutes, her sharp eyes scanning the instruments, hands poised yet unmoving on the console. The cold, distant princess he had encountered earlier now felt like a stranger to him, someone not entirely human, someone driven by a purpose far beyond anything he could understand. "Where are we going?" he asked, his voice quieter than before. Ilara turned her head slightly, enough to give him a side glance. "Somewhere safe, for now." "Safe?" he snorted, incredulous. "You call this safe?" Her lips quirked into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Safe from those who would have us dead. Safe from those who still seek to use my bloodline to restore the Vrentari Empire." "And where is that?" Ethan pressed. "Because so far, we're flying blind." Ilara hesitated, a flicker of something unreadable flashing across her face. "A place I never wanted to return to," she said softly, almost to herself. "That doesn't sound reassuring," Ethan muttered, but his eyes never left her. She sighed, turning her full attention back to the console. "It's not supposed to be reassuring. Nothing is. The moment you decided to save me, you crossed a line. Human, you're in this whether you like it or not. But we'll need time, and that's why we're going to Zerka." "Zerka?" He furrowed his brow. "Isn't that a dead world?" Ilara's eyes flicked to him, a sharp, knowing gaze that held a layer of irony. "Dead to you, perhaps, but not to me." She paused, her expression hardening. Zerka was the heart of the Vrentari Empire, before everything fell apart. Ethan's stomach churned at the weight of her words. He hadn't realized how deeply the fall of her empire had affected her. To her, Zerka wasn't just a forgotten relic. It was a tomb of her ancestors, The last place that held any true connection to the power she once commanded. You said the Vrentari are dead, Ethan said carefully. What if you're wrong? What if someone else is still trying to restore that empire? Ilara's lips pressed together tightly. Her jaw clenched as she absorbed his question. Then we're both already dead. The finality in her voice made Ethan pause. He had to wonder what she really meant by that. He had seen a hint of vulnerability in her earlier, when she'd mentioned the dangers lurking for both of them. But now, her cold confidence had returned, a facade to mask the fear and uncertainty that must have been gnawing at her from within. Zerka, once a shining jewel of galactic power, was nothing but a graveyard now, a shattered world. Its ruins littered with the remnants of an ancient and advanced civilization. And yet, for Ilara, it was the last place that could hold the answers she needed to escape the shadows of the past. The ship made a soft hum as it adjusted its trajectory. The flickering lights in the cabin gave everything a strange, muted quality as they sped toward the forgotten world. Zerka was a planet of desolation. Once, it had been a glittering world of towering cities, vast palaces, and sprawling archives filled with the knowledge of 1,000 generations. Now, all that remained was a broken wasteland, its surface scarred by countless battles. Cracked and lifeless, the planet hung in space like a forgotten monument, a sad testament to a civilization lost to greed, corruption, and betrayal. The ship descended through the thin atmosphere, the harsh red glow of the planet's dying sun casting eerie shadows across the landscape. Ethan's eyes flicked nervously over the jagged horizon below them. It was hard to believe this was the same place Ilara spoke of with such reverence. Why are we here? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. What could possibly be left on this world? Ilara didn't answer immediately. She seemed lost in her own thoughts, her gaze fixed on the approaching surface. Hope, she finally said, her voice tight. Hope for the last remnants of my people. And answers. She glanced at him, her expression unreadable. This is where it all began. The Empire, my birthright, and this, she gestured to the planet below, is where it will end. Ethan stared at her, trying to understand what she meant, but the words didn't come easily. Birthright? End? Was she planning on dying here? Or was she trying to resurrect something, someone? The ship touched down on the cracked surface with a soft thud. Outside, the desolation of Zerka greeted them with an unsettling silence. The wind whispered across the barren plains, but no life stirred, no signs of the people who had once walked these lands. Ilara stood, her posture as regal as ever, though the weight of the world seemed to press on her shoulders. Stay close, Ethan, she instructed, her voice suddenly carrying a cold edge. We're not alone here. As they stepped off the ship, the air was thick with dust, and the ground beneath their boots felt brittle and uneven. The ruins of the once great capital sprawled before them, towers half collapsed, statues of long-forgotten kings and queens crumbling under the weight of time. The smell of decay lingered in the air. But it wasn't just the planet that felt dead, it was the very essence of this place, like it had absorbed every ounce of life from within. Ethan's gaze wandered to the distant horizon, where a shadow seemed to flicker, a shape, barely visible, lurking just beyond the ruins. He wasn't alone. Stay alert, Ilara whispered, her hand at her side, near the weapon hidden beneath her cloak. There are those who seek to bury the past completely. They won't let us, take the answers we need. Ethan nodded, but his mind raced. He didn't know if he was ready for whatever was coming next. He didn't know if he'd ever be. But with each passing moment, as Ilara moved deeper into the desolate heart of her broken empire, he realized one thing for certain: this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about revenge. And Ilara was ready to claim it. Chapter 4: The Forgotten Guardians. The silence of Zerka pressed in on Ethan like a physical weight, the eerie stillness broken only by the soft crunch of his boots against the dry, cracked earth. As he followed Ilara deeper into the ruins, every step seemed to reverberate through the empty city, reminding him just how far they had come from the hustle and bustle of Terran space. He glanced at Ilara. Her eyes, once a striking shade of amber, now held the distant look of someone who had already seen the end. But even in this place of death, there was still fire in her, an indomitable spark that refused to be snuffed out. What exactly are we looking for here? Ethan asked, his voice echoing slightly against the decaying architecture. Ilara didn't look back at him. Instead, Her gaze was fixed on the horizon, where jagged peaks rose from the ashes of the ruined city. The citadel. It was the heart of the Vrentari Empire, the place where our ancestors stored the knowledge and technology of our people. It's said that within its walls lies the key to restoring the empire, or destroying it completely. Ethan felt a shiver crawl up his spine. You think the citadel still exists? After all this time? Nothing in the galaxy ever truly disappears. Human. It's simply hidden, buried beneath the weight of history. Her voice was filled with certainty. And yet, beneath it, there was something else, something that made Ethan question whether Alara was searching for the citadel to revive her people or to erase them from existence once and for all. They continued to walk in silence, moving deeper into the heart of Zerka. The ruined city had once been a masterpiece of alien architecture, with soaring spires and majestic palaces, but now it was a labyrinth of crumbling stone and shattered glass. Once proud statues of Vrentari rulers stood toppled and broken, their features eroded by time and neglect. Ethan's thoughts were interrupted by a faint sound, something like the soft whisper of footsteps, carried on the wind. He froze, his hand instinctively moving toward the blaster at his side. Alara's reaction was instant. She drew a sleek, silver blade from beneath her cloak, the weapon shimmering faintly in the dim light. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned the horizon, every muscle in her body tensed, ready to spring into action. Stay close, she ordered, her voice low and commanding. The Guardians are never far from here. Guardians? Ethan repeated, confusion clouding his mind. What are you talking about? They were once the elite protectors of the Vrentari throne. Their sole purpose was to defend the citadel and ensure that no one could uncover its secrets. Her gaze hardened as she looked back at him. The Guardians were thought to be nothing more than legends, just like the citadel itself. But legends are often built on truth. Ethan's pulse quickened as he remembered the shadow he had seen earlier. Something, or someone, was moving out there, lurking in the ruins. And it wasn't just his imagination. So you think they're still alive? Alara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she motioned for him to stay silent as she crept forward, her footsteps light and deliberate. The sound of movement grew louder, and Ethan's hand went to his sidearm, his eyes scanning the horizon, searching for any sign of movement. Suddenly, a figure appeared from behind one of the crumbling stone pillars. It was tall and cloaked in tattered robes, its face obscured by a hood. A faint, almost imperceptible hum emanated from the figure as it stepped forward. Ethan instinctively raised his blaster, but Alara was faster. With a fluid motion, she stepped in front of him, her blade gleaming in the dim light. Wait, she said, her voice filled with a strange mixture of recognition and caution. It's one of them. The figure lowered its hood, revealing a face that seemed impossibly ancient, its skin pale and wrinkled, but its eyes burned with an unnatural fire. The being's gaze swept over them, lingering on Alara with something akin to reverence. Its voice was deep and echoing, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Alara, daughter of the Vrentari, you returned to the place of your ancestors. The voice was both a statement and a question, as though the being was still unsure whether she was truly the one it had been waiting for. You know me? Alara's voice was sharp, her blade still at the ready, though she seemed to recognize the figure. The Guardian nodded slowly. We know all who bear the blood of the Vrentari royal line. We have waited for you. Ethan stepped forward, his confusion mounting. What do you mean? Waited for her? Who are you? The Guardian's gaze shifted to him, and for a moment, Ethan felt the weight of centuries pressing down on him. It was as though the creature could see through him, as if it could peer into his very soul. I am a guardian of the citadel, the being replied, its voice as cold and timeless as the ruins surrounding them. I am one of the last of my kind, entrusted with the protection of the knowledge of the Vrentari. And you, human, are an intruder. Ethan stiffened, his grip tightening on his blaster. I'm just here with her. I'm not. He is not the enemy. Alara interrupted, her voice firm. He is the one who saved me, the one who has shown courage where none would dare. The Guardian regarded Ethan for a long moment, its glowing eyes narrowing slightly as if measuring his worth. Finally, it spoke again. The path you walk is dangerous. Human, you tread on the edge of oblivion. But for now, you live, and you have earned the right to follow the Vrentari daughter into the heart of our empire. Ethan's mind raced. This creature, This guardian was ancient, its very presence seemed to bend the air around them. It had spoken as though Alara was not just a survivor of her people but the key to something far greater. "You're going to take us to the Citadel, then?" Alara asked, her voice steady but laced with something darker. The guardian nodded once, its movements slow and deliberate. "Follow me, but be warned, daughter of the Vrentari. The path to the Citadel is not only fraught with danger from those who would use the power you seek. The Citadel itself is a place of great power. You may find more than you are prepared to face." Ethan glanced at Alara, a question hanging in the air between them. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. This was about something much larger than either of them, a force that could change the fate of the galaxy. Alara's jaw tightened as she met his gaze. "Let's go," she said, her voice quiet but resolute. "The past has already caught up with us." With that, the guardian turned, leading them deeper into the ruins of Zerka, and into the heart of a story that had been written long before they were born. A story that would reshape everything they thought they knew about the galaxy, and about themselves. The Citadel awaited. Chapter 5: The Citadel's Secrets. The path through the ruins of Zerka grew increasingly treacherous as the Guardian led them deeper into the forgotten heart of the planet. The city had long since fallen to decay, and the landscape had transformed into a twisted graveyard of shattered pillars and crumbled towers. But despite the desolation, there was an undeniable sense of purpose in the Guardian's movements. Alara walked ahead, her eyes focused, every step calculated, as if the ground beneath her feet carried the weight of centuries. Ethan, following closely behind, felt out of place, an outsider in a world that hadn't truly been his. The silence of the ruins pressed in on him, broken only by the echo of their footsteps and the occasional creak of the structures around them, which seemed to groan in protest at their intrusion. The Guardian's form, tall and unerringly calm, seemed to glide through the wreckage without difficulty. Despite its age, it moved with a precision that was almost unsettling, as though it was part of the very fabric of the city itself. Ethan couldn't help but feel a growing unease. He was no stranger to danger, but there was something about this place, something ancient, that made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. The deeper they went into the heart of Zerka, the more palpable the sense of forgotten power became. The city was vast, and yet, it felt empty, lifeless. There was no sign of the advanced technology or culture that had once flourished here, only the remnants of a fallen empire. After what seemed like hours of walking through the decaying city, they arrived at a massive structure, what was left of the Citadel. The outer walls were cracked and scarred, the once grand entrance now a gaping wound in the stone. But even in its ruin, the Citadel retained a certain dignity, a silent testament to the power it had once held. "We are here," the Guardian said, its voice resonating in the still air. Ethan stood in awe. This was it, the Citadel, the very heart of the Vrentari Empire. His mind raced as he realized that what lay beyond this broken threshold could change everything. Whatever Alara was searching for, whatever the Citadel held, would either make or break them. Alara didn't hesitate. Her hand moved to the massive door, which, despite its age, still stood strong. It was adorned with intricate symbols and carvings, runes, perhaps, that told stories of ancient glory and power. "The Citadel's defenses are still active," the Guardian explained, its glowing eyes watching Alara with a mixture of reverence and caution. "Only one of royal blood can open the gates. You, Alara, are the last of your kind. You are the key." Alara's expression remained neutral as she approached the door. Her hand hovered over the surface, tracing the glowing runes that had long since lost their meaning to most of the galaxy. With a deep breath, she placed her palm against the stone. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a deep hum reverberated through the air, and the ground beneath them seemed to tremble. Slowly, the massive door began to slide open with an almost mournful sound. The Guardian stepped back, its gaze never leaving Alara. "You have entered the heart of your ancestors' legacy. Proceed with caution. The Citadel holds many secrets, and not all of them are meant to be uncovered." Ethan couldn't suppress a shiver. The air inside the Citadel felt thick with history, as if the very walls were alive with memories of the empire that had once ruled the galaxy. The temperature dropped, and the dim light inside only served to make the atmosphere feel even more oppressive. Inside, the Citadel was a labyrinth of vast, cavernous halls and darkened corridors. The walls were lined with holographic displays, some flickering with static, others dimmed with age. Despite the advanced technology, there was a haunting emptiness to the place, as if it had been abandoned long ago. Ilara moved through the hall with purpose, her steps steady but slow, as if every move she made was being measured by the citadel itself. Ethan followed closely, his senses alert. Every creak of the ancient floorboards, every hum of forgotten machinery, seemed to echo in the vastness around them. "I can feel it," Ilara said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "The power, it's still here. The knowledge, the weapons, everything my people once held." She paused, her expression darkening. "But so is the corruption. It was my ancestors' downfall. They became drunk on power. They sought to control the galaxy with fear and domination, and it destroyed them." Ethan swallowed, trying to imagine what kind of force could bring down such a mighty empire. He glanced at her, seeing a flicker of pain in her eyes before she masked it again with her usual cold demeanor. "Does this place hold the answers you're looking for?" he asked quietly. Ilara didn't answer immediately. She walked forward, passing through several more darkened chambers until they reached a massive central chamber. The walls here were lined with strange, glowing symbols, more complex and alien than anything Ethan had ever seen. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, upon which rested a crystalline object, pulsing with an otherworldly light. "The core," Ilara murmured, her voice filled with awe and fear. "This is what remains of the Vrentari's greatest weapon, the source of our empire's power." Ethan stared at the object, feeling an almost magnetic pull toward it. The crystal seemed to hum with an energy that was both foreign and familiar, as though it were calling to him, too. But there was something unsettling about it, something that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "This is what they wanted," Ilara continued, her voice quiet but filled with dread. "The Vrentari weren't just conquerors, they were manipulators. This core holds the key to their power, a technology capable of bending reality itself. But it's not just a weapon, it's an anchor, a tether that binds the entire galaxy to the will of the Vrentari. And now, it's my responsibility." "Your responsibility?" Ethan repeated, confusion creeping into his voice. "What do you mean?" She turned to him, her eyes hard. "I can either use this power to rebuild the empire, or destroy it once and for all. But either choice comes at a price. The core doesn't allow for neutrality. Once it is activated, there will be no turning back." Ethan felt a chill crawl down his spine. The weight of her words settled over him like a shroud. This wasn't just about survival. This wasn't just about escaping the mercenaries chasing them. This was about the fate of the galaxy itself. Ilara stepped forward, her fingers brushing the surface of the crystal, and for a moment, the air crackled with energy. Ethan could feel the power emanating from it, and his heart pounded in his chest. He didn't know what was about to happen, but he could feel it in his bones. The galaxy was on the verge of something irreversible. Before Ilara could make contact with the core, a deafening roar echoed through the chamber, shaking the ground beneath their feet. A new danger had arrived. And this time, they weren't alone. Chapter 6: The Reckoning. The roar that echoed through the Citadel's vast chamber was like nothing Ethan had ever heard. It was primal, guttural, as though it came from some ancient, predatory force that had been waiting in the shadows for centuries. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and the very walls seemed to shudder with the weight of the sound. Ilara's hand jerked back from the core, her eyes snapping toward the entrance of the chamber. Her posture stiffened, her expression hardening into something cold and resolute. Ethan, his hand instinctively reaching for his blaster, scanned the room, trying to pinpoint the source of the noise. His heart was pounding in his chest as he took in the dim, flickering light of the chamber, his senses heightened by the growing tension. And then they appeared. Out of the darkness beyond the glowing symbols on the walls, a group of figures emerged, tall, armored, and imposing. Their movements were fluid and inhuman, as though they had been waiting, watching, in silence for eons. Their armor was sleek, a deep obsidian black with glowing runes pulsing across the surface, reminiscent of the designs Ilara had shown him earlier. "Vrentari Guardians," Ilara whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of anger and recognition. "They were never meant to be fully deactivated. These are the ones who sought to control the empire after it fell." The Guardians moved with purpose, their steps synchronized as they advanced toward Ilara and Ethan, their eyes glowing like the core itself. seemed to pierce through the dim light, locking onto Alara with an intensity that felt suffocating. Ethan's pulse quickened as the first guardian raised a weapon, a long, crystalline staff that crackled with energy. The air around them shimmered as though reality itself was bending beneath the force of their presence. Ilara, daughter of the Vrentari, one of the guardians spoke, its voice cold and metallic. You dare to awaken the power of the core? You bring ruin to all who would oppose us. The Empire shall rise again, and you are its rightful queen. Ilara stepped back, her eyes narrowing as she raised her blade. You don't understand, she said, her voice steady despite the tension. The empire that existed before is gone. It will never return. The Guardian's expression, if it could be called that, remained unyielding. The core is the empire's heart. It can never be destroyed, only reborn. You are the key to that rebirth. Ilara, accept your destiny. Ethan felt the weight of their words settle over him. These were not just soldiers, they were zealots, driven by an unshakable belief that the empire was meant to rise again, and that Ilara was the only one capable of restoring it. You're wrong, Ilara snapped, her blade still poised in her hand. The Vrentari Empire fell because of its arrogance, its thirst for power. There is no rebirth for it, not under my rule. With a speed that surprised Ethan, the guardian closest to Ilara lunged forward, its staff crackling with energy. Ilara met the strike with a swift and powerful movement, her blade clashing against the staff with a sound like thunder. The force of the blow sent a shockwave through the room, knocking Ethan off balance. He quickly regained his footing, drawing his blaster, but the guardians were everywhere, their movements too fast, too precise. They were more than just soldiers, they were alive, in some twisted, artificial way, made to fight and die in the name of a long-dead empire. Ethan, Ilara shouted, her eyes flicking to him for a split second. Get to the core, I need you to activate it. Activate it? He repeated, confused. What are you talking about? You're the one who can, she insisted, her voice sharp with urgency. It's only powered by blood, my blood, but it needs more. You have to interface with it, or we'll all die here. Ethan didn't have time to process what she was saying. A second guardian swung its staff toward him, and he instinctively dodged, rolling to the side and firing a shot in retaliation. The blast hit the guardian's armor, sending sparks flying, but it didn't slow down. Damn it, Ethan swore under his breath as he scrambled toward the core. He knew that if they didn't act quickly, they were going to be overwhelmed. The guardians were relentless, and Ilara, despite her skill, was starting to tire from the constant attacks. He reached the pedestal, his heart pounding in his chest, and looked at the crystalline object that pulsed with energy. Ilara was right. There was something about it that called to him, some deep, subconscious pull that made him feel as though it was connected to him in ways he couldn't comprehend. He placed his hand on the crystal, just as Ilara had done before, and the moment his skin made contact, a surge of energy shot through his body. The sensation was like 1,000 volts of electricity running through him, but instead of pain, it was alive. The power filled him, flooded his senses, and for a brief moment, it was as if the entire galaxy was connected to him, his body, his thoughts, his very being intertwined with the core. He gasped, staggering back slightly, but the guardians didn't stop their assault. They were still coming, relentless in their pursuit. Ethan, Ilara screamed again, her voice strained with desperation. You need to stabilize it. The core, it won't stop without your connection. You have to control it. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and sensations, the information from the core pouring into him faster than he could process. The power it held was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was a vast ocean of knowledge, technology, and raw, untapped energy, but there was something dark within it, too, a twisted seed of destruction, buried deep beneath its surface. I can't hold it, he shouted back, struggling to maintain control. The crystal thrummed with such power, it was as though it was trying to break free of his grasp. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through his head, and he staggered again. The guardians were closing in on him, their weapons raised, their glowing eyes filled with unwavering purpose. Ilara, Ethan shouted, his voice ragged. I can't. Stop it. You have to help me. But Ilara wasn't listening. She was locked in a brutal fight with the nearest guardian, her blade clashing with the staff once more. The sound of metal against metal rang out, a symphony of chaos in the otherwise silent chamber. Ethan. Ilara's voice was barely audible over the cacophony of battle, but her words cut through to him with clarity. You have to trust yourself. You are more than just human. You were chosen. He didn't understand. Chosen for what? He wasn't one of them. He wasn't Vrentari. But as he gripped the crystal tighter, the power surged again, and the answer seemed to crystallize in his mind. He wasn't just a bystander in this fight. He was a part of something far greater. The moment that realization hit, the core reacted. Energy crackled through the chamber, and for a brief instant, everything froze. Then, with a deafening roar, the power erupted from the core, filling the room with blinding light. The Guardians recoiled, their forms flickering, as if the energy itself was tearing them apart. Ethan staggered back, nearly losing his balance, but the light was too overwhelming. The Guardians' forms began to disintegrate, their armor and weapons crumbling to dust as the power of the core consumed them. Ilara, her eyes wide, dropped to her knees. Ethan, you did it. Her voice was barely a whisper, filled with awe. The Guardians were gone, their threat eradicated, but the power from the core still pulsed around them, and the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. But for now, Ilara and Ethan had survived. For now, the past had claimed its price. And the future, if there was one, was just beginning.